you know, when I made My Beautiful Laundrette, London was full of, you know, people from the colonies, you know, you know what I mean, people whom we'd ruled over. Now it was full of people with whom we had no connection. Turkish people, Russian people, Spanish people. And suddenly a script arrived that explained who all these people were.
There's a line in the film where Chiwetel's character says, someone says to him, I've never seen you before, and he goes, well, we're the people you never see.
That's right.
It was a sense of exposing a side of London that perhaps many British people chose or
failed to see,
not
yes.
to see.
Well, I was one of those people who hadn't seen it, so it was all very, very interesting.
Did you care about whether it would have a political impact on the issue of human trafficking? After it was made and it got a lot of attention for tackling, you know, those issues.
The truth is, life is more complicated than that. I remember there are scenes in a sweatshop in Dalston, and they took me to this sweatshop in Dalston. Now, I've never been in a sweatshop before because I'm respectable and middle class. So I was taken in, and it was rather a nice place. And I remember the Archers was on the radio, and the sun was shining. And you thought, well, this is ridiculous. Clearly the police know about this place. They're choosing not to raid it. And it's, you know, people are earning money here, so I guess it's part of the economy. So actually what I really remember is that everything that we were filming, the Home Office clearly knew about and chose to ignore, because, as I understand it, large parts of the country wouldn't work if we didn't have illegal immigrants. So that was really what I was interested in.
Kenny, I mean, your film Gas Attack, you know, chose in its own way to look at something that was very much in the news about migrants. I wondered what you thought when you saw Dirty Pretty Things, how far films like that, and indeed before it Casablanca, were in your mind ever when you looked at doing a film of your own that tackled refugees?
Well, none of those films were in my mind when I made Gas Attack. Gas Attack was very much about a kind of a biochemical terrorist attack, an imaginary version of that, and what would happen, and how would we be able to respond to that.
What did you feel was you know, the final product? Was it what you wanted?
I think it's always hard when you're doing a film that's a kind of issue-driven film, you know, because you're trying to shoehorn everything in there, and sometimes all the time at the expense of character. Really, I mean, I come from a drama background, and it's very much character-led. This was a kind of slightly different project. But what was interesting about Glasgow at that time, and it's true even just now, that, you know, Glasgow has a great reputation for taking, you know, 2 busloads every week of people seeking asylum into Glasgow. The people get housed in accommodation that a lot of people in Glasgow wouldn't normally don't want to live in. And on one side of the equation, it's incredibly humanitarian and very positive. But the other side is Glasgow District Council are near to bankrupt. By taking these people seeking asylum, they qualify for various grants, and which then get used for the houses to get done up, as in they get new windows in the houses, they get new carpets. People nearby are going, hold on a minute, how's that guy getting a new window there? You know, so the people seeking asylum are kind of being exploited and being used as a kind of economic commodity.
Did you choose to make a bit of a target of how the local authorities, how officialdom was handling refugees?
Well, I think that's the truth of this situation, and it's not because the individuals are, you know, racist or have a certain agenda, but there is a kind of level of officialdom. I mean, in Glasgow, you know, if there was a biochemical attack right now, it would be a shambles. We don't have a system in place to deal with that. And I suppose it's just looking at the structures and the hierarchies that we put in place in order to try and make the society we live in a better, easier place.
Well, I wondered, I mean, any of you, does it make a difference that now, unlike something like Casablanca, where you're talking about European refugees who looked like a lot of the audience, you're talking about a specific war that was very close by. Now we're talking about people coming from different places, far away, and race, and kind of to some extent class being a factor. Does it make a difference? Does it make it harder to make a film that will grab an audience about refugees?
I think some of the refugee films are disguised in a sense. I mean, one of the most popular films ever made, The Sound of Music. I mean, the Von Trapp family end up as refugees at the end of it, but it's never billed as such. And I think there is a tendency for people to quite like, I mean, even the news media quite likes fairly clear-cut goodies and baddies. And we know that in Casablanca, the Germans wore grey, so it's not exactly the white hats and the black hats, but it's, yes.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? I mean,
I don't know.
Partly having chosen to make a documentary which focused on these people, a lot of, the Burmese Karen, a lot of people would never have heard of them.
I don't know whether I'm typical or not, but I grew up on a very wide mixture of different films, and my first language was Spanish, and I remember growing up and feeling quite weird. And I remember that going into school, for example, and having to talk about your parents, and having to tell people that my parents went to prison, and for that to try and explain that they might not be bad people. And the same way, it was really nice watching films like Casablanca, for example, where you'd kind of think, well, that kind of explains it, because the world's much more complicated than you think it is when you're 8 years old, and I think it definitely opened my eyes in that way. But in terms of seeing films now that, express a kind of the wider refugee experience, I mean, I was always attracted to films from other countries, so more than necessarily maybe English films, because I just felt like it was something I didn't know about, whereas I felt I knew England quite well. And I think I was definitely, when we talked about making a film about Karen refugees from Burma, immediately what particularly attracted me to it was the whole thing was so extreme. The dislocation was so extreme. The culture shock was so huge. It was the kind of, there's so many stories about refugees, and yet I felt like I'd seen the European version, and actually what was so intriguing for me was almost like a kind of traveling through time or traveling through space or something. It was like traveling to another planet, because for them they really had no idea really what they were kind of going to find in their destination. And I felt, you talk about all these kind of things, like, it's the way it's described in the tabloids, for example, it's always this kind of thing about, well, people know what they're getting in for, these people are conniving, they're trying to get through the system. And you see these guys who are going through legally and so on, it's actually, they have really no idea what to expect. And for me, that was, I feel that I've led a very sheltered existence, and actually, I've never done anything particularly heroic in my life, and yet these people were being kind of victimized and kind of, just turned into these ridiculous kind of scapegoats by the tabloids, and yet what they were doing is clearly heroic. And I just felt, and the same with, I think what attracted Michael to doing In This World was the same thing. It was like, well, we're getting all these terrible tales in the tabloids, and actually what's the reality? What is it? Well, it's the kind of picaresque adventure in some ways that you can't really undergo, and even though, like being a Westerner or something, I'm protected by my nationality, by my knowledge, by my language, and so on. And they're not, and they really have no idea what they're going. So it's really kind of throwing themselves out into space. And I just felt like that was something worth talking about. And it was much more interesting for me that they'd come from somewhere completely alien in so many different ways to our culture, and yet seemed to engage with it and react in exactly the same way, in a completely intelligible way. People were saying, oh, there's such a huge culture difference, Western audiences won't get it. Well, actually, they behaved exactly the same way I think I would probably behave in similar circumstances.
What's interesting, I think, to me about all the films that are getting screened tonight is the idea of a repressive regime or a war that has forced people to move. All of the films are kind of linked in that sort of way. So I think when you're talking about films about refugees and people seeking asylum, I think it's good to try and articulate the wider picture of the forces that are at work that are pushing people elsewhere in the world.